I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The last thing I remember tasting was a piece of bread I'd found near a dumpster behind the deli. It was dry and hard, but I chewed slowly, pretending it was something warm, something made with care. That morning, the air in Riverside Park was sharp enough to make my fingers ache. I was sitting on a bench, counting the coins I'd collected from a half-empty coffee cup, when a black sedan pulled up by the curb, the kind of car that didn't belong anywhere near people like me. The door opened, and a man in a gray suit stepped out. His shoes clicked against the pavement. He looked around, then said quietly, "Mrs. Porter?" It took me a moment to realize he was talking to me. I almost laughed. No one had called me Mrs. Porter in years. Out here, I was just the woman with the shopping cart. I hesitated, unsure whether to answer, but something in his voice, steady, patient, made me nod. He introduced himself as Mr. Hayes, a lawyer from California. He said my brother, Daniel Porter, had passed away 3 weeks ago. I felt my stomach twist. Daniel and I hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Then he said the words that didn't make sense. "You've inherited $42 million. Mrs. Porter." I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline. Maybe it was a cruel joke. Maybe he'd mistaken me for someone else. But he handed me an envelope with my name, Margaret Porter, written in Daniel's handwriting. The same looping letters I'd seen on every Christmas card he used to send. The world around me blurred. I wasn't cold anymore, just empty. And for the first time in years, I whispered, "Why now? Daniel?" I held that envelope like it was something alive. The paper was thick, ivory, the kind people used for weddings or funerals. I traced the edges with my thumb before I dared to open it. Inside was a letter from Daniel's attorney, asking me to come to California to claim my inheritance in person. My first thought wasn't joy, it was disbelief. Then, guilt. Because if Daniel was gone, that meant I was truly alone. I spent that night in the park again, sitting beneath a lamp that flickered every few seconds. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the years before everything fell apart. Back when I had a house, a husband, and a daughter who used to run into my arms after school. My husband, Robert, passed away 10 years ago, a heart attack, sudden and cruel. We had life insurance, but not enough to cover the medical bills that came before his death. By the time I realized what was happening, I was drowning in debt. I sold the house, the car, everything that still had value. When I moved in with my daughter, Elaine, I told myself it was temporary. She and her husband, Victor, had a nice place in the suburbs, a house with polished floors, the smell of lemon cleaner, and framed photos of their vacations. For a while, they seemed glad to have me. Elaine would bring me tea in the mornings and ask if I'd slept well. Victor would smile and tell me not to worry about a thing, but as the months passed, their kindness thinned like cheap fabric. Victor began working late, avoiding me at dinner. Elaine stopped asking about my day. When I offered to help with groceries or laundry, she waved me off like a child bothering an adult. I still remember the night everything ended. It was winter, and snow was falling in heavy, silent sheets. I'd made soup, the kind Robert loved, and waited for them to come home. When they finally did, they didn't sit down to eat. Elaine stood in the doorway, her coat still on, and said, "Mom, we need to talk." Victor stayed behind her, arms crossed. He didn't say a word, just stared at the floor. Elaine's voice shook, but her eyes were cold. "You've been here almost a year. We've tried to make it work, but it's too much. We can't keep supporting you." I looked at her like she was a stranger. Supporting me? Elaine, I clean the house. I cook every day. I don't cost you anything. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising. "Victor and I need our space. We're starting a family. We can't have you here anymore. It's not healthy. I could have begged. I could have reminded her of the nights I stayed awake with her when she was sick, of the mornings I packed her lunches, the years I worked double shifts to pay for her college. But something in her expression told me it wouldn't matter. So I just nodded. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll go." Victor helped carry my suitcase to the porch. He didn't meet my eyes. As he set the bag down, he said, "We'll help you get a motel for a few nights, just until you figure things out." But the card he handed me had $50 on it. Not enough for a week, maybe 2 nights, if I skipped meals. That was 4 years ago. Since then, I'd learned how to survive invisible, moving between shelters, parks, and subway stations. You stop expecting kindness after a while. You start believing the world has already made up its mind about you. Now, standing in front of a lawyer in a crisp suit, hearing about millions of dollars, it all felt like a cruel joke. When Mr. Hayes offered to pay for a flight to California, I hesitated. He must have seen the suspicion in my eyes because he said, "Your brother wanted you to have this. Mrs. Porter." He left instructions, specific ones. "But you have to be there in person." I asked him, "Why now? Why me?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe he wanted to make sure you'd believe it." That night, I used the lawyer's prepaid motel room for the first real shower I'd had in months. The water stung my skin, washing away layers of dirt and shame. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired, but there was something else, a flicker of defiance. I packed the few things I owned into a borrowed suitcase, a worn-out sweater, a photo of Robert, and that old tin box Daniel had given me when we were kids. I didn't know why I kept it all these years. Maybe because it reminded me of a time before disappointment had a face. As I zipped the bag shut, I thought of Elaine. For 4 years, I'd rehearsed what I'd say if I ever saw her again. I told myself I didn't care, that I was better off alone. But the truth was, I still wanted her to look at me and see more than a burden. Tomorrow, I'd fly to California and find out what my brother had planned. But tonight, lying on the motel bed with the letter clutched to my chest, I made a silent promise. If fate was giving me another chance, I'd take it. Not just for the money, for my dignity. I didn't plan to see Elaine again, not after what she'd said the night she pushed me out of her house. But when Mr. Hayes told me my flight to California was in 3 days, I found myself thinking of her anyway. I wanted to know how it would feel to walk through her door again, this time not as someone begging for a place to sleep, but as someone she'd never imagined I could become. I called first. She didn't answer. On the second try, Victor picked up. His voice was sharp and cautious. "Margaret, is everything okay?" I let the silence stretch just long enough before I said, "Better than okay, actually. I have some news." He cleared his throat. "Is this about money again?" That made me smile. You could say that. 2 days later, I stood on their porch again, just as I had 4 years earlier. The house hadn't changed. The same white shutters, the same neat lawn, the same porch light that flickered when it rained. But I had. My hair was clean, pulled back neatly. I wore a navy coat I'd bought with Mr. Hayes' advance money. For the first time in years, I looked like someone who belonged inside. Elaine opened the door, surprise flashing in her eyes. "Mom, what are you doing here?" I gave her a calm smile. "I won't take long. I just wanted to see you before I leave town." Her confusion deepened. "Leave? For where?" "California," I said simply. "I've been invited to a dinner tonight, too, though not the kind you'd expect." She hesitated, glancing toward Victor, who appeared behind her. His expression was polite but uneasy. "We're actually having people over tonight," he said. "Business dinner?" I tilted my head. Then it's perfect timing. I'd love to see you both in your element. Elaine started to object, but I stepped forward, brushing past her gently. Don't worry, sweetheart. I won't embarrass you. I promise. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. On the table, there were silver candlesticks, crystal glasses, everything shining. I took a seat at the end of the dining table. No one offered to stop me. When the guests arrived, 3 of Victor's colleagues and their wives, I smiled and introduced myself as Margaret, the mother-in-law. One of the women complimented the food, and I said, Elaine's always been good at presentation. Elaine's hand froze around the serving spoon. The conversation moved to finance, investments, new clients. Victor's voice grew confident again as he talked about expansion, about trust and integrity. I listened quietly, tracing the rim of my glass. When the plates were cleared and the laughter peaked, I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter, the one from Daniel's attorney. Speaking of trust, I said, interrupting Victor mid-sentence, you'll never believe the week I've had. Everyone turned to me. I was living in Riverside Park last week, I said, my tone light, conversational. And then a man showed up, told me my brother died, left me $42 million. For a second, no one spoke. Then one of the wives laughed softly, assuming it was a joke, but I placed the letter on the table. It's true. He wanted me to read his final note in California. I leave tomorrow morning. Elaine's face drained of color. Mom, that's incredible. Why didn't you call me sooner? I looked at her for a long time before answering. Because I thought I was a burden, remember? A parasite. I think was the word you used. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Victor tried to recover the room's mood, smiling stiffly. Elaine didn't mean... I turned to him. You told me you'd help me until I figured things out. I did. Victor. It just took 4 years. The guests shifted uncomfortably. One of them coughed. Another took a sip of wine, pretending not to stare. I stood, smoothing my coat. I'm starting a foundation when I return. Something for people like me, people who've lost everything but still have their pride. Maybe I'll need a financial advisor. Any recommendations? Victor's jaw tightened. He tried to laugh, but it came out dry. You're serious? As serious as you were when you left me $50. Elaine looked down, tears welling up. Mom, please. Not like this. I softened then. Just a little. No, not like this. I didn't come to shame you. I came to remind you that what you throw away can still rise again. The room was silent. Even the candles seemed to flicker more quietly. I reached for my bag, tucked the letter inside, and looked at each of them one last time. Thank you for dinner, I said. It was lovely, but I think I've had my fill. Now, and as I walked toward the door, I heard one of the women whisper, She's remarkable. Another murmured, 42 million. My God. Outside, the air felt cleaner. The night sky was heavy with clouds, but I could see the faintest glow of the city lights beyond the hill. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, letting the cold bite at my cheeks. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been satisfied after watching their perfect little world tremble. But instead, I just felt tired. When I reached the end of the driveway, I turned back once. Through the window, I saw Elaine sink into a chair, her face in her hands. Victor poured himself another drink. For years, I had wanted this moment to show them what they'd lost, but now that it was here, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. The next morning, I'd fly to California and face whatever waited for me in Daniel's letter. But that night, Walking down the quiet street in my borrowed heels, I realized something important. Money could make people listen, but forgiveness, that would make them remember. The plane to California took off before sunrise. The city below disappeared into a blur of lights and fog, and I sat by the window, clutching Daniel's letter like a lifeline. I hadn't spoken to him since Robert's funeral. We had drifted apart, like most families do when pride grows faster than forgiveness. The flight was quiet, except for the hum of the engines and the occasional cough from the man beside me. I tried to read, to sleep, to think about anything other than the hollow ache sitting in my chest. When we landed in Los Angeles, Mr. Hayes met me at the terminal. He was the same, polished, unreadable, yet strangely kind. "The house is ready," he said. "Daniel wanted it to be exactly as he left it." We drove for nearly an hour through winding streets lined with jacaranda trees. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed flowers. It didn't feel like the same world I'd come from. When we arrived, I stepped out to see a 2-story house painted pale blue, its porch wrapped in ivy. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. Memories I thought I'd buried came rushing back. Summer afternoons, the sound of Daniel's laughter, the two of us building tree forts and stealing cookies from the kitchen. Mr. Hayes handed me a key. "The letter is in his study. Take your time." Inside, the air was still, thick with the scent of old books and cedar. On the desk sat a small wooden box, a sealed envelope, and a photograph of us as children. Daniel with his arm slung around my shoulders, both of us missing front teeth. My hands trembled as I opened the letter. "Maggie, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I wish I could have been braver about reaching out. But I was too much like you, too proud, too stubborn, too afraid of rejection. I followed your life from afar. I knew about Robert, about Elaine. I saw how life stripped everything from you, and still you kept going. The money is not a reward. It's a tool. I trust you'll use it to build something that lasts longer than guilt or shame. There's one more thing in the box, a key. You'll know what it opens when you're ready. We rise by lifting others. Maggie. You taught me that when we were kids. Now it's your turn to remember." By the time I reached the end, my vision blurred with tears. I pressed the letter to my chest and sat there, sobbing quietly, letting years of silence melt into the floorboards. In the box was a small key and a folded map. The map had a red X drawn over a neighborhood in downtown Los Angeles. I didn't understand at first. Mr. Hayes explained later that Daniel had owned an abandoned warehouse there, something he'd bought decades ago and never sold. The next morning, we went to see it. The building was dusty and gray, but sunlight streamed through the broken windows, catching specks of dust that floated like gold. On the wall near the entrance, someone had spray painted, "No one cares." I ran my hand over the words, feeling the rough texture of the paint. "That's not true," I whispered. "Mister?" Hayes handed me the key. "It's yours now. Do with it what you think he'd want." I knew what Daniel would have wanted, not revenge, not comfort, something better. Over the following weeks, I stayed in California and worked with Mr. Hayes to set up a foundation in Daniel's name. We called it Bridge House, a place for people without homes, a place where dignity was currency. The warehouse was renovated into a shelter and job center. Daniel's money became more than numbers in a bank. It became beds, kitchens, and classrooms. The first night we opened, I sat near the entrance as people filed in. Some were scared to make eye contact, others too proud to ask for help. I recognized them. I had been one of them. A young woman with tangled hair hesitated by the door. She couldn't have been more than 20. "Is it really free?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes, All we ask is that you promise to come back when you're ready to help someone else." She nodded, her eyes filling with something between disbelief and hope. As weeks turned into months, Bridge House grew. Local businesses donated clothes and food, volunteers showed up. Sometimes I caught people whispering, "That's the founder. She used to be homeless." They said it with awe, but I never wanted awe. I wanted understanding. One evening, as I was locking up, I noticed a figure standing outside the gate. At first, I didn't recognize her. The city lights softened her face, made her look younger. It was Elaine. She stood there, hands in her coat pockets, eyes red like she'd been crying. "Hi, Mom," she said quietly. My breath caught. I hadn't heard her voice in years, except in memory. "Elaine," I whispered, "what are you doing here?" "I read about the foundation," she said. "I saw your photo in an article. You look happy." I didn't know what to say. "I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry," she went on, "for everything. Victor and I, well, we're not together anymore. I think I finally understand what you went through." There it was, the apology I'd once dreamed of hearing. But instead of relief, I felt something else. Peace. I stepped closer, taking her hands in mine. "I forgive you," I said simply, "and I'm proud of you for coming." Her shoulders shook as she started to cry. I pulled her into my arms, feeling her heartbeat against mine, the same rhythm I'd once listened to when she was a child. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The noise of the city hummed around us, cars, laughter, distant sirens, but it all felt far away. When she finally looked up, she asked, "Can I help with the foundation?" I smiled. "There's always room for another pair of hands." She laughed softly through her tears. "Then maybe we can start over." "We already have," I said. 3 years passed faster than I expected. Bridge House became more than a building. It became a heartbeat. Every morning, I'd walk through the halls and hear laughter where once there had been silence. People who came in broken were now helping others find their footing. There were nights when I stayed late just to watch the lights in the dorms, soft and steady, proof that no one was sleeping outside anymore. Elaine worked beside me now. She handled outreach, interviews, the things that required patience and grace. Sometimes, when I watched her talk to a young mother or a tired veteran, I caught a glimpse of the little girl she used to be, the one who believed kindness could fix anything. One evening, as we finished locking up, she said, "You know, I finally understand what Uncle Daniel meant when he said, 'We rise by lifting others.'" I smiled. He learned that from us. Actually, we just forgot for a while. She nodded, looking around the courtyard where the last of the sunlight touched the walls. "Do you ever miss the old house? The one in Cleveland?" "Sometimes," I said, "but I think home isn't a place you go back to. It's what you build after you've forgiven yourself." She reached for my hand and squeezed it. "I'm proud of you, Mom." I looked at her, really looked at her, her tired eyes, her steady hands, the quiet strength that hadn't been there before. "No," I said softly, "I'm proud of us." We stood there for a while, listening to the evening settle. Across the street, the sign above the gate glowed faintly in gold, "Bridge House," in memory of Daniel Porter. Sometimes people ask me if the inheritance changed my life. I always told them no. It wasn't the money that saved me. It was what it allowed me to give back. That night, before turning out the lights, I walked through the sleeping quarters one last time. Someone had taped a handwritten note on the wall. It said, "Thank you for seeing me." I smiled. For the first time in my life, I felt seen too. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.